Hello guys, welcome to this video lesson. Today the main topic will be talking about the modern age, and in particular the modern age covers a time span which goes from 1901 up to 1945, and so we're going to focus on the first decades of the 20th century. I'm going to give you an introduction of the main events leading to the World War I and World War II. And in order to do so, I'm going to show you an interactive timeline. With this timeline, we can explore the most important historical events of the time. We can read the descriptions over here and look at some classic pictures which will give us a sense of realism of the powerful and important events we are going to study. A very particular age, a very important age as well. Let's start from, okay, here we have a picture of a bomb attack in the American bombers Germany, the rail network of Domfort, in order to prevent the Germans from supplying themselves with men and material. This is a picture taken from the National Archives, US. Well, the successor to the throne of Queen Victoria was Edward VII, and he was the son of Queen Victoria. During the reign of Edward VII, the British Empire was at its highest peak of its power, and France and Germany were Britain's competitors in the field of technical innovation and industry. Thanks to the King's diplomacy, Great Britain entered into a new alliance with France and Russia. Most of the population of the United Kingdom still lived in poverty. Unfortunately, there was the social problem of the poverty of the lower classes. The next event, the Women's Social and Political Union, called the WSPU. The suffragettes movement was created during this period in 1903. Suffragettes were a group of women, and their leader was Emmeline Pankhurst. They formed the Women's Social and Political Union in order to demand the same rights to vote as men. They had to carry out a lot of different kinds of protests before finally in 1918 the parliament gave women the right to vote if they were over 30 years of age. The next event now is the Entente Cordiale, which was a kind of treaty with France. France and Britain in 1904. France and Britain felt the need to oppose to the Germany increasing power in Britain. So they formed an alliance. And at the same time, the German emperors claims to conquer Morocco and the Balkans and Turkey. They therefore set their traditional rivalry aside, France and Britain, and they decided to sign an agreement which provided for the mutual recognition of disputed African possessions. Okay, so African possessions were the topic for this dispute. Well, the next historic event, the Labour Party, the foundation of the Labour Party in 1906. After the general election, the Liberal won, and the Labour Representation Committee founded the Labour Party. The Liberals were divided between the traditionalists and the new liberals, who supported the state intervention. The group included the future Prime Minister David Lloyd George among its members. Now let's see. George V succeeded his father to the throne of England. Okay, when he became a king of Britain, the atmosphere was very tense. And there was so much tension. The liberals in the political English matters, the Liberals decided to limit the power of the House of Lords after it had rejected Lloyd George's proposal to introduce a land tax, which was included in his people's budget. Right, the next event, the National Insurance Act. We are between 1911 and 1914. The liberal governments laid the foundation of a modern welfare state. They guaranteed the protection and well-being of the British citizens by introducing an old age pension, a minimum wage, and an insurance against illness and unemployment. They also established employment offices around the country. So the National Insurance Act was passed thanks to the Liberal government. And now we come to the break of the World War I. Okay, we have very long rivalries between the European countries, and there was a great desire for revenge and independence. This period was marked by strong ambitions for expansion and nationalism. All these elements were combined, and the difficult relations between the European countries transformed this difficult situation into the break of the war. This conflict became a world war when the Ottoman Empire, Japan, and the USA got involved into this war, which was first among the European countries, but after this also these great and powerful countries were involved into the war. All right, 1916, conscription is introduced in Britain, and the Easter Rising in Dublin. So Britain introduced that conscription during World War I, and women replaced the men at work. During 1914, the Irish Home Rule Act was suspended until the end of the war. This led to a revolt in Ireland and in Dublin, which was followed by a very bloody repression. And this event was called the Easter Rising because it happened during the Easter in 1916. Well, the next picture. The name of the British royal house becomes Windsor. The Windsor family came to the throne of England, and the USA enters the war. Here we have a very popular picture of the enrollment to the American Army. In England, George V changed the name of the British royal family from the German name Saxe-Coburg-Gotha to the British name Windsor. In the same year, German war submarines attacked American merchant ships. After this event, the conflict intensified, and the United States joined the war in support of Great Britain in 1917. Very good. The next event. The next event is the armistice, which was signed in 1918. The armistice is like a temporary ceasefire, and was signed on the 11th of November. With the signing of the peace treaty of Brest-Litovsk, Russia's participation in the war ended. So Germany deployed all its forces and resources in the West. After the victory at the Battle of Amiens, the United Anglo-French Army liberated France and Belgium. Italy defeated Austria at Vittorio Veneto. Armistices were signed later in 1918, and the peace treaties over the following 2 years were signed. In 1919 was signed the Treaty of Versailles, and we have the foundation of an independent Parliament of Ireland. The treaty ordered the unilateral disarmament of Germany, which had to pay heavy reparations. President Wilson proposed a 14-point plan, which included the foundation of the League of Nations, which was the forerunner of the United Nations, which was coming to be the future United Nations. The President Wilson was the American president. And this League of Nations had the task to prevent the future wars. The 1918 election in Ireland was won by Sinn Féin party, which set up an independent parliament in Dublin in 1919. Now let's go to the creation of the Irish Free State. In 1921, after the terrorist attacks by the IRA, the Irish Republican Army, in 1920, Britain recognized the Irish Free State, which was led by Eamon de Valera. However, 6 countries in Ulster remained under the British jurisdiction. And let's see now the Irish Civil War, 1922. A war broke out between the Irish Republican Army, IRA, in Southern Ireland, and the British forces in the north. In the end, a treaty was signed to create the Irish Free State, which was made up of 26 counties, where Gaelic was one of the national languages. It was not until the 1948 that the new country became completely independent from the jurisdiction of UK. And now let's go to the general strike in Britain. In 1926, there was a general strike that was one of the biggest clashes between the working class and the British government in the 20th century. Poor working conditions in mines and an attempt to reduce miners' salaries led to a general strike taken by the miners. The workers from other sectors joined the protest, which became general, and it was harshly and heavily repressed by the police, by the local police. The Great Depression in the United States, 1929. The Great Depression is the name given to a period of great economic crisis that started with the Wall Street stock market crash. Many people lost their jobs and became homeless and poor. So there was the fall down of the Wall Street stock market. In 1929, Franklin Roosevelt became president of the USA, and he launched a recovery plan, also called the New Deal. His government made his intervention in the economy, and he established new aims for economic development. He enforced the law and protected the most vulnerable social classes. After only a few years, the US economy recovered, and the poverty decreased thanks to the president plan called the New Deal. The next event we're going to explore is Edward VIII was the new king of England. He succeeded his father George V to the throne. He decided to marry a divorced American woman, and this event had a consequence because he was forced to abdicate in favor of his brother, who became king as George VI. In the same year, 1936, a civil war broke out in Spain between the nationalists and the Republicans. And this civil war lasted for 3 years. The Spanish Civil War. the next event, the breaking out of the World War II, which lasted from 1939 up to 1945. Like World War I, World War II was also fought on a global scale. Tanks and aeroplanes, which were now available, facilitated a mobile war instead of a positional one, which was the World War I. And more states around the world got involved. Any distinctions between the front and the rear bases disappeared, and civilians were forced to endure a mass exodus, a mass deportation, and attacks. All right. The Battle of Britain between British and German air forces, 1940. When British and German bombers fought over Sussex and Kent, Britain won. Germany then began an intense bombing campaign in London and other British cities. The royal family chose to remain at Buckingham Palace in London to demonstrate that the nation had the strength to resist the attacks from Germany. In the next phase, December 1941, Germany invades Russia. Japan bombs Pearl Harbor in the Hawaii Islands, and the USA enters the war. On the 7th of December, without any warning, Japan attacked the US military base in Pearl Harbor in the Hawaii Islands, destroying the fleet which was anchored there in the harbor. The USA declared war not only against Japan, but also against its allies, the Axis powers, which were Italy and Germany. Right? Well, June the 6th, 1944. On D-Day, the Allies land in Normandy. After landing in Normandy, which was in the north part of France, with a large army and numerous armored vehicles, the Allies headed towards Paris. The Allies, including United States. In autumn, they reached the Rhine, where the Germans made their final attempt to defend the Western Front. From the east part, the Russians, who had occupied Warsaw in August 1944, proceeded towards Berlin and Vienna. And we are now in the final part of the war. Germany finally surrenders. The atomic bombs are dropped on Japan. World War II ends. On the 6th and 9th August, the USA dropped 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. The first bomb caused the immediate death of 90,000 people and thousands more deaths later due to the radiation. The second atomic bomb made over 50,000 deaths, and Japan had to surrender on the 2nd September 1945. And this tragic event, marked the end of World War II. and Germany finally surrendered as well. Okay, let's go now to have an overall view of the historical and political and cultural tendencies of the first decades of the 20th century. I'm going to show you this overall view on page 155. And at the beginning of the 20th century, the British government passed some laws to help the poor and to protect the workers through the national insurance, and also he passed some unemployment benefits. The campaigns for women's votes became more energetic, and thanks to the suffragette movement, the World War I broke out in 1914. Nobody could imagine it was going to last 4 years. And unfortunately, during the war, 3 million people died. They were Allied soldiers from the British Empire. New weapons were employed during the war, like gas, tanks, planes, and these were used for the first time and made a massive difference to the warfare. By 1900, many working class people felt they were not represented by the established political parties. New organizations were founded, like the Labour Party, the trade unions, and they started to be heard by the government. There was a general strike in 1926, and this strike was one of the biggest showdowns, which means a decisive confrontation between the working people and the government in the 20th century. The Depression in the 1930s was the worst of the century. It started in the USA in 1929 and affected the whole world. Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and the north of England suffered the worst for this depression. And the depression began to lift in the mid-30s. During this year, there was the beginning of the depression. World War II broke out in 1939. Britain was fighting for its life in the summer of 1940, since France had fallen and the German forces were preparing to invade Britain. The British defeated the German Air Force in the Battle of Britain. The first decades of the 20th century were characterized by a growing sense of frustration due to the slow dissolution of the empire, in which became later the Commonwealth. But we have also the dissolutions, a slow dissolution of all the certainties and of the old values. A big gap was created between the young and the old, and this gap became wider since after the World War I, because the new generation felt really betrayed from the previous generation. For this reason, there was this gap between the young and the old. There was also an increasing doubt of the certainties linked to science and religion, owing to the new theories introduced by Sigmund Freud, Albert Einstein, William James, and Henry Bergson. The first 2 decades of the 20th century were marked by an extraordinary originality in the arts, which developed into a spirit of revolt and also a kind of experimentation in art and also in literature. Um, instead, in 1930s and 1940s, were characterized by political commitment. That means a political dedication or engagement, both in poetry and in prose. Okay, that's all for today. We may finish here, and I'll see you for the next video lesson. Okay, goodbye and take care.